The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm excited to have Robert Chen joining us today. Robert, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. It's great to be on.
So Robert, you are a partner at ExecCom, where you lead a team of consultants to support your client business development efforts. You've worked with Fortune, 100, 1,000 clients, many top professional services firms. You also teach and are a lecturer at the Wharton School, where you focus on managerial communication, persuasion, storytelling, and more. Great to have you on, and excited to have you share some of your story and lessons learned with us here today, Robert.
Thank you so much.
So before we get into how you got to where you are, or some of the strategies, the tactics, the approaches, the mindsets that you are using in your business today, take me back to before being a partner at ExecCom. What were you doing?
I'll tell you, my first job out of college was as an equities trader. I actually studied chemistry and economics in college. I did most of my time, at least professionally, when I was at college, doing material science research. So I thought, you know what? I need to see life outside of a lab. So I decided to go where many of my classmates were going into financial services. So I started doing equities trading for a boutique prop trading firm. And then from there, I decided, you know what, equities trading, it's great for learning pattern recognition, decision-making, but I wanted to do something that I think was more plugged into who I am. So I stumbled upon a book on how do you find your passion in life, and it all landed towards some type of teaching, counseling, coaching role. So I got a role at a health insurance company doing corporate training and coaching. And then I joined on with my firm as a consultant, and then moved on from there to become partner.
Do you remember what that book was that helped you to kind of find your quote unquote passion?
I do. There are two books. The first book I read was The Pathfinder. And that was the very first book of its kind that I read that helped you really think about who you are and what you bring to the table and finding a job that fits you. But the book I often recommend to others is What Color is Your Parachute? Just because I think it gets you to the same place in, I think, a faster read.
Right. Okay. So you decide to make a change, kind of shift the type of work that you were doing into your current firm. It sounds like you started at a more junior position and continue to work your way up. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And now you more recently, so you just published a book called Selling Your Expertise, the Mindset, Strategies, and Tactics of Successful Rainmakers. I'm sure that some of our listeners here will be very familiar with the term rainmakers. And especially if you live in Vancouver, where I am, you're very familiar with the term rain. But aside from that, in a business context, just kind of define for us, what is the role or purpose or function of a rainmaker?
Sure. So the rainmaker, as it's defined in the book, it's really someone who can generate revenue in an above average way, sustainable over time. So if you think of, I think all of your listeners as consultants can appreciate, right, the biggest, I think, value point from a consultant standpoint, of course, on your technical expertise and what you're bringing to the table is that ability to actually find people, to hire you, to use your expertise. And the way we're looking at rainmakers are just people who can do that consistently and sustainably over time. And we find that that's something that is not so easy for a lot of folks, yet a lot of people want to aspire to do that.
Yeah, I know you talk a lot about mindset, and I'm a very big believer. Many people have read The Elite Consulting Mind that we published many years ago. But I'm wondering, from your perspective and what you've seen over the years, what have you identified as the kind of key distinctions or difference in terms of mindset of somebody who is a successful rainmaker and maybe someone who is struggling?
Yeah, I would say, when we thought about why write this book, there are so many sales books out there or books on business development. It really stemmed from the work we do coaching many of our clients. And when we think about the knowledge professional in general, a lot of times when it comes to the mindset of being able to step into business development, what's hard is the shift from doing the technical work to now taking on, I think, what a lot of people often see as a deviation from that to selling the work. So often, I think one of the biggest mindset hurdles for people to overcome is to not see selling as a deviation, but to see it as an evolution, as a function of your consulting practice, your expertise in a way that allows you to further refine that expertise and to be able to tap into bigger opportunities for yourself beyond executing on work other people may have sold for you.
Right. And then Robert, I mean, I know a lot of people, they understand that, yes, I'm good at delivery, doing the work. I'm an expert in that area. I'm maybe not that comfortable going out and doing quote unquote business development, sales, marketing. They know they need to do it, but still they feel hesitation in actually taking the steps towards doing that really critical work. Because if you don't have clients, you don't have a business. What would you offer as guidance for somebody who might be hesitating a little bit right now to really lean into their business development efforts consistently? What's maybe one or two kind of suggestions you would say, here's what you should at least start doing to kind of get the momentum going in your business?
Yeah, I would say, Michael, when anyone hesitates, I often get them to focus on that itself being kind of feedback for them in terms of how they're seeing the risk reward of business development. Because often when people are hesitating, they're not seeing the value of the activities they're putting in. And one of the things I cover in the book is the idea that business development sometimes makes it difficult for people to wrap their heads around is there is a bigger luck component when you compare it to someone who's doing their technical work. Whatever kind of expertise you're in, whether it's accounting, whether it's investment banking, whether it's law, right? Often the technical work, you put in X amount of hours, you're going to get fairly definitively output that you're looking for. But when it comes to business development, you could put in X hours, but at any given point in time, there's so many variables that impact the outcome. So the understanding of that is something that can help someone feel more at ease in terms of putting in the time for business development, even when they're not seeing the results. Because it's easy to keep business development going if every person you reach out to wants to do work with you. It's when you feel like, hey, I'm doing all of these things and it's amounting to nothing that I think people begin to reassess whether that's a good use of their time. So just understanding that luck skill component to business development can help people be more at ease.
Let's make this very kind of practical, tangible for everyone who's joining us right now. Business development itself is a very broad, wide, I mean, there's so much that can go into it, right? For a consultant who's either maybe a solo consultant or a boutique consulting firm owner recognizes, okay, I get that, Robert, I need to step up my business development efforts. What are a few kind of tactics or recommendations that you would have for them to get started? Like, what can they do right now to begin generating more conversations, more calls, but ultimately more conversations with ideal clients? What are you kind of seeing working best in the industry?
Yeah, so I would say once you have a desire to want to sell, which a subset of people naturally will want to, right? They'll give it a good try, is to have a clear plan. Because one of the things that we find, because people, when they're especially getting into the selling aspect, they're typically also still doing a lot of the delivery. And the first step is to know for any contact, and I would say this is probably the most important thing, is where do you stand with them? And based on that, using a clear strategy. So in the book, I break up 3 common scenarios you'll often find yourself in. One is the scenario where there are people you know could potentially buy kind of your services, but they haven't come to you for a need, right? The second scenario is they have a clear need that they've articulated to you. And then the third scenario is you're already working with them and you're looking to expand. Right? And all 3 of these channels can allow you to find business or generate more revenue. And often, I think for new consultants, when they're just starting their business, they're often in this first scenario where people, they barely know who you are, but you know that they may be able to engage you. And part of that's knowing that in this scenario, it's not about pitching your services because they haven't come to you with a need. So it's hard to pitch something in terms of the solution that there isn't a demand for. So part of your strategy in this first bucket is looking to build relationships and understanding, well, what goes into building a relationship? Well, one, how do you make contact in a way that they'll want to engage with you again? So let's say if you call someone and they pick up, what do you say to make them want to talk to you again or potentially to meet with you? And I talk about this idea based on research around escalating commitments, that in order for you to build a relationship, you want the other person to feel like whatever interaction they had with you was positive enough for them to escalate a commitment to you, which is maybe again to meet you in person and then to request a proposal or to trust you enough to share actually what they need. And then there's when the actual sales process, or traditionally people know as the sales process, starts.
So one thing that a lot of people struggle with these days is that there's just so much noise in the marketplace, right? The typical decision maker is bombarded with all kinds of emails, phone calls, text messages, just there's a lot that they're just trying to stay focused on getting their work done, not to mention fielding in all these kind of inquiries or people that are vying for their attention. Is there anything that you found that works really well for somebody in professional services to get in front of that true ideal client and have that message resonate and that person then want to actually engage in a conversation?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, Michael, I think what you've highlighted is further exacerbated by the pandemic, where everyone's so busy and you're not face-to-face anymore. You don't have that opportunity to be face-to-face to build new relationships. So people just lean on old or relationships that they know. And a big part of being able to connect with someone who's really busy is to figure out, well, how are you leveraging your existing relationship? So if you are on your own, you have to think of your professional network and who could potentially introduce you in or provide a warm connection to you for the people you want to meet, right? If you don't have that, so not everyone's going to have a robust professional network, is, well, what are you doing to build your reputation in a way that people begin to recognize the value you can add? And that could be writing, that could be speaking, that could be doing things pro bono, volunteering. But the idea is, how do you get people to recognize what value you can bring? And then how do you begin to build a relationship in a way that they actually will share with you some of the things that they're struggling with, to present a potential opportunity to match your expertise to kind of what they're looking to do.
Right. And what about at your company, ExecCom? I mean, we're at today, what's working best for you in terms of generating qualified leads and opportunities?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that we've been very lucky to, and it's in some ways awesome to say, but also crazy, that we've been in business the last 40 years. And we have some clients that have been with us for over 30 of those years and continue to engage us, that a lot of how we've been able to build our business, and especially coming into the pandemic and out of it, is by leaning on our reputation in the business with our clients, but also continuing to offer new services and offerings. Because I think one of the beautiful things about consulting is, in order for us to get hired, we have to keep doing what we're doing well. And I think our continuing evolution of our skill set kind of has allowed us to keep our current business, but then as our buyers and folks who engage us move to different companies, that has allowed us to naturally expand. In times when things are a bit tougher, right, we do have a very strong outreach component as well. This wonderful mix of having a reputation, but also reaching out when we feel like we have more capacity and business that we want.
Yeah. Can you break down for me, Robert, like what does that look like? Just begin even at a high level. When you have additional kind of extra capacity, you do have the ability to reach out to prospective clients. What does that look like? Is that an email? Is that LinkedIn? Is it direct mail? Like, just walk me through so that everybody has a sense of what is the kind of part of the best practices that you employ to start getting more of those conversations going.
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways we would do this. I would say pre-pandemic, a lot of it was just direct outreach by phone, sometimes by email. We find phone often, depending on generation, depending on the industry, right? Easier and harder, but that was one way, just direct outreach, right, to the person we're trying to connect with. LinkedIn is also a great way to connect with folks that we may already be connected with, and certainly a lot of folks on LinkedIn. I would say something else that works really well is to be able to bring together a forum of people who will typically engage us for our services, but offer them a value-added component, similar to what you do here with this podcast. It's a place for them to get to know each other, to learn, to network, and we're kind of in that mix with them. And as part of that, being able to build our relationship as a value add to what they're looking to do in their own careers.
Is that like almost in a sense like a virtual mastermind or virtual forum where you would invite, let's say 5 or 10 more or less executives, potentially the decision makers or ideal clients, to some sort of an online webinar or meeting where you might discuss a topic? You would facilitate that, but it's a way to bring your ideal clients together to kind of explore a relevant idea, theme, something along those lines, or?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, something that we feel like the topic is relevant for them, and they have this opportunity to expand their network pretty quickly in an intimate setting.
Is there anything that you tried, Robert, in the last year or so from a marketing perspective that you really hoped might work, but just didn't, kind of fell flat on its face, or you didn't really get the kind of traction that you were hoping for?
Yeah, well, I will say in the pandemic, the direct outreach was something that just stopped working because everyone was so busy just managing their lives. And I think became the realization that often when people are really busy, they just go with the tried and true. So there was something that it was more of a in context, right, situation of, instead of just going out cold, let's really look at kind of who our current clients are, really mine, right, our current clients. I think in other places where I think we're seeing less of a return might be around the social media marketing, the pure cold social media marketing that's out there. I think it's good for potential brand building, but on the outreach side, often we find it's better to connect with folks in a higher quality way than to do a more mass social media blast or even mass mailing blast.
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early-stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early-stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
Before we go on, I want to kind of come back to one thing that you mentioned, because I think it's extremely powerful and an opportunity that many people don't pay attention to, which is to sell more to your existing client base, right? To offer additional services. So often when people think about ways to grow revenue or just to generate additional business, they think about always new clients, right? New client acquisition. That's just significantly harder, right? It takes a lot more work to build the relationships and establish trust with new people as opposed to those that you've already worked with and delivered results to. How do you all approach that when you have your existing client base, but let's say you've created a new offering, or like, what are some of the best practices that you all use when you want to share a new offering or a new way that you could add value to an existing client that is different than what you've initially kind of been engaged to do? Is any best practices or approaches that you find to work really well?
Yeah, well, in the book, one of the things I talk about when it comes to expanding existing relationships is this embed, expand, establish model. And the first thing you want to make sure you do is to embed yourself with really strong delivery. So there's a recognition, right, that your expertise is not only strong, but you are someone that they want to invite back, not just someone that, all right, we had a good enough experience that it was worth what we paid you, but I don't know if let's see who else is out there, right? So I think that's number one. And then once you've embedded yourself, a lot of how we find ourselves creating new offerings actually stems from the needs we hear from the clients directly. They'll often come to us and say, do you have content around storytelling with data and the ability, right, to kind of use data to tell a narrative? Or do you have coaching for partner candidates, right, as they're getting ready for their panels? And from there, we really look at our experience base there and begin to create custom solutions that often when we see a lot of traction for them, we may standardize across our firm to be leveraged. So often we'll usually use our relationships and understanding of a client to drive our new service offering so that, one, we know it resonates, and two, it's one that, again, directly serves a need, as opposed to something we may just build from what we think is a need that's out there.
Right. As your kind of the firm has grown and it's added more people over time, there been any changes to the offerings or the services that you provide to your clients? And if so, how has that changed now compared to before?
Well, I'd say a lot of what we used to do, a big component was to be in person with people. And certainly since the pandemic, that has changed drastically, where right now, most of our business is virtual. But often, I think the general principles, and that's in some ways when we thought about, all right, how do we distill what we think is valuable to our clients in selling your expertise, is the principles stay the same in terms of needing to build relationships. If we're helping a client with their business development, it's, well, how are you, right, building those relationships? But the medium, in terms of the way you do it, may look different, or your ability to understand what need, right, they might have. You may be able to do it through social listening or other methods. But knowing that, okay, once there's a need, how do I get them to be open to speaking to me about that need? And then how do I close that deal, right? Those principles remain the same. So from our offering standpoint, a lot of it is just figuring out, well, what is the outcome our clients are looking, just like all of the listeners here, just like you as well, Michael, where we hone in on, well, what do they want to happen? Mm-hmm. And is my expertise the thing that allows them to get there? And coming back, I think one of your earlier questions around the hesitation to sell, I will say one of the things for, I think, all of us to keep in mind is we spend a lot of effort and time to build our expertise. And often this expertise is really designed or built up to serve, right, other people's needs. So when we think about selling, it's really about serving and serving others so that they can reach where they want to go. And when people see selling as serving as opposed to self-serving, I think they become less hesitant as well to kind of bother someone, because if they're not hiring you, they're hiring someone else. And if you have put in a ton of work, then in some ways it could be an injustice to both your client and certainly to you if you don't put your best foot forward for them to consider you to solve their problem. One
of the things connected to that is that when you shift your mindset from being more transactional and selling and the sales is something you do to someone, and instead it's something you do for someone or with someone, right? So a lot more of that serving first mindset, that almost equals or means that you need to have a longer term mindset, right? So you move from transactional short term to longer term value focused. What advice do you offer or would you suggest for somebody who is saying, okay, like I understand that I need to maybe just really ramp up, deliver a lot more value, not hold back, understand that I'm trying to build relationships here. But if somebody wants to generate results faster, they need to get revenue in sooner, they don't maybe have the cash cushion that a larger firm or more established firm might have, what comes to mind for you? What advice might you give to somebody in that kind of position?
Yeah, I think what's tough, depending on what we mean by short term, is I do think when it comes to consulting, especially if you want to be a rainmaker, there is a commitment you want to make to the role. I think what is really hard to do is to dabble in consulting, try to get outside, unless you have something extremely unique about you that can get people's attention really quickly and the word spreads. Of course, that's a possibility. But I think for most people, you can become a rainmaker, but you have to give yourself, I would say, at least a 2 to 3 year ramp where you're saying, you know what, I am going to do this. Because what ends up happening in consulting is once you get a foothold and you deliver good work, everything becomes a little bit easier. You're going to have more people willing to vouch for you. You're going to have more opportunities. So then your ability to grow your business comes faster because you have more people recognizing what you're able to do. Whereas right now, if you are starting cold, no one knows what you're able to do. And there are so many people who seems able to do the thing you're able to do. But if you can commit to that horizon, then I think that will change the way you operate. Because often if you give yourself such a short time, then you're pushing. You're pushing for something that may not be there. And again, no one is going to react to that well, because they feel like, well, if you're pushing so hard, right, is this going to be a short-term relationship as well? Especially as you're looking at, depending on your level of expertise, the type of trust you need, right? I don't know if you could really shortcut trust, right? Your ability to build trust.
Robert, how many people are in the firm right now at your company?
Yeah, we have about 55 people.
Okay. I'm very interested in what you've seen. One of the, again, challenges consultants have is they look at, as they're starting to build their team, they notice that has an impact on the profitability or the profit margin of the business, right? Mm-hmm. So as you're adding more people, all of a sudden now your profit margin starts to shrink. Yet that's in many cases, right? Like you need to invest in a team, in infrastructure, resources in order to grow. What have your kind of experiences been around? How do you personally kind of think about that as the company is making investments into growth, but that can also impact the profit margin of the business? Any kind of thoughts or experiences connected to that?
Yeah. So of the 55 employees, that's going to be a mix of consultants who are revenue generating to those who are our facilitators, where we do training, coaching services. So we have folks there, and then our support team. And I think the mix is always, right, how do we, and part of writing this book is it's also our internal guide as well for training our folks, bring in profitable revenue. So I don't know if the growth of people necessarily impacts margin as long as we have the right revenue that's also coming in to sustain that growth. But I think what we always think about is, well, how do we get people closer to the client so that everyone's work is related to driving value for the client? And value for the client is the proxy for what they're willing to pay us, right, to serve them.
Another question. So about Rainmakers, I mean, here, as you are running a smaller consulting business, like people initially, they're the ones, so the founder is going to be the one doing all the business. They're doing everything, right? Over time, you start to have that question of, do you want to be focused more on delivery? Do you want to be focused more on business development, right? And then as the company gets larger, like there's very few, very like established, successful consulting firms where the owner or the founder is doing all of the work. So at what stage do you think a Rainmaker can be not the founder of the business? And when they get to that place, is that person also typically in your mind, like, is it good for them to still be involved in delivery, or should they just be solely 100% focused on generating business and building those relationships?
Yeah, so I think it'll depend on a number of factors. One is certainly that individual and the type of life they want to have for themselves and the mix of work that they want. And then two, just like any other organization, what is the hardest thing, right, for that organization? Often it is going to be on the revenue generation side, because if you had a lot of revenue generators, then the founder or whoever was the core revenue generator could potentially do something else and be okay. It's hard to bring in revenue. And I think the way to think about it, and this is going to be the inevitability when any one of your listeners become hopefully a Rainmaker in their own right, is you're going to run out of time. Right? The time you have to reach out to clients and to drum up business, you're going to run out of that time because you still have to deliver on the work or some of the work, or at least manage the client service side of it. And that's when you have to start building out a team. And you can have a team take on kind of different elements. You can have someone who's really gifted on client service really take on a lot of the back to day-to-day client interactions. You might have someone who's really good at the cold outreach, business development piece, take on that element, and then you focus on perhaps closing. So a way to think about that equation is continuing to find resources to give you leverage and scale, right? Certainly, there are some people where they've built their platform using technology, where they're one person with a lot of great ideas, and they have, whether it's videos, online courses, where they're scaling, right, books, right, scaling their impact, being able to drive revenue in a way that doesn't take up their individual time. So those would be the ways to think about it. I don't know if there's an easy equation of saying, well, you should shift to management when you're at this stage. And I do think it's very much related to the strengths of the individual themselves. So they should do what they're really good at doing, and then potentially find support to help with other elements, including overall management, right? Because a lot of that is operational that you may not want to take on.
I want to get your take on, especially as you're involved in your company, 50 team members. As a firm, think about your kind of goals and initiatives for the year, for the quarter. When you encounter something that isn't clear cut. What I mean by that is, let's say you decided we want to grow our revenue by X percentage, or we want to achieve this, or we want to launch this new offering, but you don't know the answer of exactly how to do that. So you might have an idea, but I think all of us in business, right, at one point, like we recognize that we know where we want to go and we have an idea of how to get there, but there's some like kind of bridge that we need to cross, or there's some challenge there. How do you personally, with your team, go about overcoming those challenges to ensure that you keep reaching your quarterly and annual goals? Like, do you turn to a coach? Do you start reading? Do you do online research? Do you call people? Like, how do you kind of approach overcoming challenges from a business perspective?
Yeah, so I would say, what you've highlighted there, I think we're probably not alone. Sales forecasting is just really, really difficult. And I think what we try to do is look at the data that we have, right? And part of that data is what are the existing conversations. Some of us have kind of long-term contracts that you can begin to project out the information. But I think it's key to have the data to know, well, what is it that we would do differently if we didn't achieve what we were looking to achieve? Is it that we got so hung up on delivery, right, in Q4 that now we have no business in Q2 of next year because we didn't spend that time? So what we try to look at are the behaviors that we would try to do differently when we didn't achieve the thing that we thought we would achieve with the work that we would put in. So that's typically how we would look at it. And how do we fill that gap? It depends on what the gap is. Is it really, all right, we need to staff up on more facilitators because we ended up teaching a lot more. We ended up doing a lot of the coaching. Or we need to potentially bring in designers because we found ourselves designing more complex programs. And then that would be perhaps the way to fill the gap. If it's knowledge gap, I think, being in a organization that is within learning and helps other people build skills, I think we naturally look to build our own skills. So that's embedded in that. And that could be books. It could be attending a workshop, whether it's individually or as a team. So that's how we will typically look at anytime we don't reach or it doesn't look like we're tracking to get to where we want to go. It's to look at, well, where did we go wrong in terms of our assumptions of what should have happened? And then from there, we'll find hopefully that the next experiment to put in place to try to get there.
And even before things, let's say, go off course a little bit, as part of your internal planning process, do you spend, and maybe you kind of said this, but just to confirm for everybody joining right now, do you look at, okay, here's our goal, and you get very clear about kind of quantifying what that goal looks like, what success looks like? Do you as a team or even personally yourself spend time thinking about, number one, what are all the things we need to do in order to reach that goal? To me, I think that's probably pretty clear. Everyone does that. But also, like, as you said, what potentially could take us off track? Like, so do you spend any time thinking about what are the potential threats or dangers, or what are the things that could come up that we need to make sure that we plan for? Or is that something that you don't really think too much about until you start noticing that you are actually going off track?
Yeah, so some things we certainly will think about is the macro environment, right? I think right now, at least if the recession is a thing, right, that's kind of happening is on the horizon. And often, at least in our business specifically, right, that's one of the biggest risks, because when business, just like we saw when the pandemic first started, when people are focusing on survival, right, training and development is by the least, right, of their concerns. But at the same time, a topic like business development may actually get more investment as firms are looking. So we will look at it from that lens in terms of what might be some headwinds or tailwinds as well that can help. And then I think from there, we also look at kind of our internal resourcing to support the growth as well. And sometimes that there can be a mismatch because whether it's people getting sick or people feeling burnt out or attrition that may happen. So we will look at that as well. But often we find there are so many variables that come into place. So thinking too much about it often isn't that productive as well. I think you want to have an eye on it and think about what you might do differently. But I would also caution against spending so much time, especially if you're an individual, right, trying to map out scenarios. I think that time is actually better spent just reaching out and really creating a lot of touch points and opportunities for yourself. If we're really thinking about business development and drumming up more business.
Yeah, no, I mean, your point about the recession or upcoming recession, potential for recession, however we want to kind of look at it. Like, is there anything that you all are doing right now internally as you're thinking about kind of possibility becoming more and more likely? I mean, it's, as you said before, like inevitable that it's going to happen at some point. So is there anything that you're doing right now to prepare for that so that if and or when it does kind of rear its ugly head, you are already taking advantage of it or positioning yourself for the best chances of success?
So I would say, since I'm a part of a company, a big part of it is just looking operationally. Can we sustain a revenue hit, whatever percentage, right, 20, 30, 40? And what does that mean from carrying forward the staff that we have? So we look at it from a kind of managing our resources standpoint. In terms of serving our clients, I think continuing, right, to figure out, well, in that environment, what might be, right, something that we have to respond to from a service standpoint. But I think it's also recognizing that likely when it happens, that it's going to happen and we will need to kind of wade through it and with our clients and making sure we're still with them and supporting them in that way. But it's really hard to say if we'll kind of change the way we operate in terms of what we do, because that I think will continue to be driven by the needs. But I think we want to prep for operationally, what does that mean if revenue just goes away? And how do we weather the storm in becoming stronger, finding other avenues? One practical way in some ways is the book, because often not everyone can engage us for our workshops or the one-on-one coaching. So the book actually becomes a really, in some ways, cost-effective way to gain many of the insights that we have on business development and building skills that you may need. So that could be a proxy or at least another avenue, right, to bring revenue in for the firm.
Yeah. All right, a couple of questions before wrapping up. So yeah, you have a team around you, right? 50 people. You've just been writing the book, right? You're busy with everything that life has to kind of offer or throw at you. What are one or two habits, things that you kind of do on a daily basis that you feel support your performance, your productivity, your focus, and your success?
So I'll say this in some ways was the reason why I wrote the book as well, is I try to focus on it. This is actually the mantra of our entire firm, is to focus on others. So when I think about, well, why are we doing this? How does this serve others? I think that really helps, at least me personally, to can keep going on the long nights, to whether it's serving the clients, writing the book, talking about the book, is, oh, well, this I believe is going to be helpful when people hear this and when they get this messaging out there. I think the other is I'm a strong believer in the connection between kind of the mind and the body. So getting enough sleep, right? Eating right, I believe, is extremely important when it comes to managing your energy, because there are so many things to get done. And if you're not taking care of that side or getting exercise, then it's very easy for it to impact everything else that you do. So those are some things I really kind of think about, is making sure I take care of my body, and then how is what I'm doing serving others at this moment in time.
Yeah. Is there anything that you do specifically in terms of like health, for taking care of your body, fitness, daily practices that you find just to be really helpful?
Yeah, I try to move every day, whether it's taking a quick jog or run or doing some push-ups. So something where I'm moving my body, raising my heart rate on a daily basis. And then I also actually started doing this probably over the last 5 months, this time restricted eating, where I'm only eating right between a 10-hour block. And I found that it's amazing, the connection to getting better sleep. So by eating within this allotted time, I found it's helped me with my sleep. And I think that would be the most critical thing, is getting good sleep.
Yeah. And so we're going to let people know where they can go to get your book in just a moment. But in the last 6 months or so, what's another book, not your book, but another book that you have either read or listened to that it can be fiction or nonfiction, but you just has really made an impact, you've really enjoyed it, and you would recommend to others? Yeah.
So one book that comes to mind, I do a lot of reading, is 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. I think he's a fellow in the UK. I'm sorry if he's not in the UK, but in life, you only have 4,000 weeks. But what was pretty, I think, compelling for me is that, one of the points he makes is that, what you end up accomplishing in the grand scheme of things really doesn't matter. And instead of focusing on being productive and efficient, you should really focus on the life you want to live. And I'll tell you one simple thing that kind of changed how I've worked even, is that he's saying a lot of times we're trying to clear our to-do lists, but the better we are at achieving and clearing our to-do lists just creates longer to-do lists. So it's like this never-ending cycle. So instead of focusing on clearing things away, just focus on the one thing you want to do in that moment. And it sounds very simple, but I'll tell you, that's changed the way I approach work. That like right now, the one thing I'm doing is speaking to you, Michael, right? And to your audience, as opposed to thinking, oh, I'm clearing this off, I'm clearing that off, because a lot of things we clear off our plates are probably not worth doing at all. And email being the perfect one in terms of the number of emails I used to try to just delete, as opposed to just going to the core ones that I wanted to respond to. And that's really stood with me. There were other good ideas in that book, but that was the thing that came to mind.
Well, it's really funny that you mentioned that, because I did a podcast earlier today, and that's the exact same book that they also recommended. So I'm definitely going to have to check out this book. I was interested. So I had Benjamin Ritter on earlier today. These will come out at different times, but he recommended that book, and here you are recommending that same book. So definitely have to check that out. All right. So Robert, before we wrap up, I want to make sure that people can learn more about you and especially your book. Where's the best place? Should they just go to Amazon, or is there a specific site or something that they should go to learn more about the book?
Yeah, so it is available Amazon, bookstores, both hardcover and Kindle. They can go to selling-your-expertise.com. And then they can also visit our organization's website, exec.com. So we're really excited to hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. So it's great to, part of our launch. And Michael, I can't thank you enough for having me on to your audience.
Yeah, great to speak with you as well, Robert. And excited to continue following your journey and learning more. So thanks again for coming on.
Likewise, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.